Hi, on today's show, we've got Brian Will, a two-time Wall Street Journal best-selling author, serial entrepreneur, someone who's been doing it his whole life. We discuss how he's been growing businesses from the time he was a very young boy until the time he's now, well, we'll say not quite as young. Here's my conversation with Brian Will. Brian, thanks for joining us here today. Happy to see you here. Happy to see you from, I guess, sunny Atlanta, right?
JP, thanks for having me. Yeah, although it's not very warm down here today, it's gotten chilly.
Oh, is that right? It's not true. It's always sunny in Atlanta, right? You hear always sunny in Philadelphia, but always sunny Atlanta is the way I think of it.
I just said it's not that warm here, but then I realized you're in Ottawa and it's probably freezing up there. So it's wonderful here.
Yeah, exactly. In comparison, we just got our first snow, which means again I'll be down in Florida soon. So, Atlanta, are you a football fan? Have you looked to see what's going on with the BCS championship?
Weirdly enough, I also own a chain of sports bars and I don't watch sports. So go figure.
Good for business, I suppose, right? The chain of
It's a great
restaurants.
business. Yeah, if you got them in the right place, that's where everybody goes. So they're fun to go to, but I don't really care who wins and loses.
There you go. Okay, well, so I mean, your focus has been always obviously business, and it's been through the years. How did you come into a chain of restaurants, among other things?
I've done a bunch of different companies. I've had two venture capital exits, one private equity exit, and the last one we sold. It's almost a cliche. I hate to say this when people sell their business and they make a lot of money and suddenly they think they're a restaurateur, a bar owner. We all think we're Sam Malone from Cheers, back in the 80s. And I used to love to take my people to lunch or to happy hour. And we're sitting at this place that we always go to happy hour after it's sold the companies. And the woman that does my accounting says, "You come here 3 or 4 times a week. Why don't you buy the place?" Aha. So I did. And then it failed. So I bought four more. And then it went on to 15 different restaurants over the past 13 years. And I still own a little chain of four of them.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. It's interesting you say that, Brian, because there's so many times I've got clients that have made money doing what they really do know, right? And
Yep.
of course, they want to lose it all in a restaurant, right? Or they put it into a restaurant. And we always say, hey, look, if it's a passion project, go ahead and do it. I've had a couple of clients even thank me for the advice, right? They're like, yes, I get it. I poured the money into it. I still enjoy it, or it was fun to do. But yeah, better to stick with bread and butter. Now, you've learned, I guess, in the trenches. We were just speaking offline, but clearly throughout your career, you've tried, tested, and true, and then you've had a few failures along the way as well. The way that you learn, right? What would be some of the things that you'd say early in your career were things that taught you what you needed to do to get those successful exits?
Oh my gosh, my very first business I started when I was 21. It was landscaping. And honestly, I did that because I had failed out of high school. I had no education, no discernible job skills. I was a terrible employee and kept getting fired. So I figured I might as well work for myself, right? So I started a landscaping company, built it into 7 franchises over the next 8 years. And as I like to say, it did really well until it didn't. And then it collapsed around me and I lost everything: my house, my rental, my cars, my Mercedes, my motorcycle, my sports car. And my daughter had to have open heart surgery, and I couldn't pay for my health insurance at the time because I had made a couple of critical errors that I've carried with me forever. One was, don't ever have the majority of your business wrapped up in one client, because if you do, you don't have a business, you just have a job. And when that client goes away, and they probably will, so will your business. And if you've built an infrastructure around it and you've got overhead and employees and equipment and loans, suddenly you have no way to pay for it. So that was a huge learning. The second was, because where I came from, as my income went up, I was still trying to get all the toys in life that I never had as a kid. So as my income went up, so did my expenditures, so did my lifestyle, so did the toys. And when we hit that 1 month where a contractor withheld $150,000 and I didn't have any savings, I had no cash, I had no lines of credit, and I couldn't pay my bills. Couldn't pay my vendors, my creditors, couldn't pay my mortgage, my car payment, couldn't pay anything. And it literally collapsed my company in a matter of about 60 days. You get the letter from the bank saying, "You bounced 130 checks. We no longer want to do business with you and you owe us $3,000 in bounce check charges." And you're like, holy crap, my world has collapsed around me. Those are powerful learning experiences you carry
Powerful
with you.
learning experiences, and it can go quick, as you say. It strikes me as like you gave two things that led to that. It strikes me as well, perhaps structuring. I mean, you're talking to a lawyer. It strikes me as
hmm
perhaps you weren't incorporated, or there wasn't a way to limit your liability there as well. Which again becomes that much more painful, right? When everything's tied together, which is likely the way it was for that first one.
Well, gosh, JP, let me interject because I want to ask you a question as a business lawyer. Because as a guy who consults for businesses today, I was incorporated. I mean, I was an LLC, right? Sub S chapter LLC. But how many small businesses do you know that have their LLC incorporation paperwork who aren't legit? Didn't do their annual filings, didn't have their company meetings, didn't pay their fees, didn't do commingled their funds. I see this 8 out of 10 times. So yes, you think you have protection, but unless you're doing it right, you really don't. You can pierce
Well,
that veil in a skinny instant.
that's great. I wish you would get a chance to speak with more clients before they actually start to implement things. Typically, the
Hmm.
ones that do consult or get legal end up doing it the right way. As you say, that 8 out of 10, they're trying to do it on their own. Oftentimes, they're sort of bootstrapping. I understand they're doing
Yep.
that, but then, as you say, they miss all the steps that actually afford them the protection that is by the design of the structure, right?
Yep.
Because it's so often where people come and they're already in trouble, right? They come and they say, hey, I need
Yep.
help. I need help getting this fixed up. It's like, oh, it's such a shame, because if you had put the right
Yep.
foundation in place, there'd be so much more we could do. You'd be much better protected. So yeah, absolutely. A lot of times people aren't, if they haven't put the proper structure in place, they aren't using it. So it's a two thing, right? You got to do it first properly and then actually use it. So absolutely, it's good advice. Obviously, as you consult with people, and obviously as an attorney, I say the same thing.
Yep. Yep. 100%.
So
So that was the big one.
yeah, that was the big one. Some tough lessons early on. Fortunately, you learned them earlier. What were the next kind of businesses that you got into?
So after that, a buddy convinced me to sell health insurance, and I didn't want to do it. He talked me into it. So 6 months later, I finally decided to do it. And for whatever reason, I have no idea. I figured out that I had an ability to sell. I guess it was a natural thing. I tell people all the time, sometimes you have abilities you don't know. You have hidden talents that you haven't figured out yet. And my hidden talent when I was 29 years old was apparently I knew how to sell. And within like 6 weeks, I became the top agent in this agency I worked for. And then because I'm an entrepreneur at heart, I broke off, started my own agency. And because I'm ambitiously lazy, that's a whole episode we could do, ambitiously lazy. I figured out a way to sell health insurance without going to see people, because back in 1997, you still had to go physically knock on a door and get a signature and a physical check. We figured out a way around that, and we developed the first what we call direct to consumer call center in 1999, which was also the dawn of the internet. And these companies were trying to figure out how to sell health insurance online. I was the only agency in the country doing it. I did my first venture capital deal. So did that, and that led to a second venture capital deal. That led to another private equity deal that I did, which got me into consulting for Fortune 500 companies, which got me into writing books and consulting for businesses. And I got into politics, and it's just been this weird multiple industry story over the last 30
It's
years.
great, right? You take the excuse me, you take the tour, and you're having a great time clearly doing it. It must have been interesting first time venture capital. Can you recall the first conversations, what that looked like? Probably a fish out of water. How the venture capitalists made you feel?
I can tell you the first time I went to Sand Hill Road, and we had gotten acquired. And I remember going into the boardroom, and these are people, if you know anything about Silicon Valley, you
I
would
used
know
to
who
live
these
right by
people
Sand Hill
are.
Road. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm standing in a boardroom looking at all these plaques on this back wall of all these companies that were acquired and how much they bought them for, how much they sell them for. And all these guys come in to sit at the table, and they all want me to talk to them about this business. And I remember freaking out. Like, I had a panic attack. And I'm staring at these guys, and I'm having an internal panic attack. And I said, I got to go to the bathroom and get some water. And I literally just walked out of the room because I didn't know what to do. I was freaking out. I was sweating. And one of the
Was it
guys
just
comes
you?
out.
Were you the only guy
It was
in on the
just
meetings?
me. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was me. And one of the guys came out of the room, and he says, "Hey man, calm down. We're just a bunch of dudes, you know." And then we got back, and everything went good.
Yeah, and
I
that's
can.
why I asked the question, because it's so intimidating, right, for people that, and that's why they, among other things, listen to this show, because the first time I mean, they feel like a fish out of water. They're so intimidated, but
Hmm.
you're down on Sand Hill Road, and they are just guys that they're running a business as well, right? Their business, they
Yep.
got to move money, they got to invest in projects. So once you understand that, they actually need you just as much as you need them.
Yeah. I mean, they were excited to hear from me, because that's what they do. So yeah, I can tell you the first one I sold. I remember standing in a corporate boardroom of $1 billion company after I'd sold the second business, and they wanted me to come in and consult for their company on how to increase efficiencies within their direct to consumer division, which was $1 billion division, right? And I remember I pull into this boardroom, and I'm standing there looking at the CEO and the CFO and all these C's, right? And they're looking at me, waiting for me to talk. And I remember thinking, 5 years ago, I was probably mowing your grass. And now I'm standing in a boardroom about to tell you what's wrong with your company. I mean, oh my God, 5 years can make a world of difference in your life.
It sure does, right? And the things you see, right? That's kind of what it takes, right? Yeah. Once you have the mindset that, hey, I can actually run this company, I can actually affect this change. Well, that's the first step in actually making it happen, isn't it?
It's 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 crazy. One more quick story. Remember when we sold the second company? It was in the insurance industry, and
Different
I was
different
sit.
VC, or were you selling to VCs, or where were the transactions? So you're
We
getting
were
VC
selling to
funding.
VCs,
You're selling to
selling to
VCs, yeah,
VCs. I never
yeah.
took VC funding. We just sold to them.
I see.
But we had sold the company. Company was gone, and I was sitting in our office with one of my partners, and my phone rings, and I pick up the phone, and it's this woman. Her name was Laura, who was the head of sales for $1 billion company. And she said, Brian, what are you doing these days? I said, well, at the moment, Laura, I'm sitting in my office. Why? What do you need? She goes, got this division up in Minneapolis. It's losing about $1 million a month. Can you come up and tell me what's wrong with it? And I was like, sure. He goes, how much are you going to charge me? And I'm like, remember 3 years ago, I was making 100 grand a year. And I said, I'm not sure, Laura. She goes, it's about a week's worth of work. Is $100,000 enough? And like, you don't even know what to say at that point. Like, I was like, yeah, that sounds about right.
That should do it. Okay, yeah, we're good to
And,
go.
and, and I hung up the phone. I walked to my partner's office. I says, you're not going to believe this shit. This woman just offered me 100 grand for a week. He goes, man, you just sold two companies. You're an expert now. You need to get used to it. I'm like, man, I don't know how to get used to that. That's just freaking amazing.
Yeah,
And
and
it
it's
just
also the
balloons
value.
from
This is
there.
the one thing, right? And I'm sure you see it now, right? When you create that multiple for that business person as they sell, because I just see the same thing as people go to sell their companies. The advice they're receiving, there's a return to them as well, and so it's you can't do this by a daily or weekly
Hmm.
rate. You got to oftentimes look at the value that you're creating, and I'm sure as you provide that type of advice, you are creating value that makes that $100,000 fee to throw in the bucket for them.
Oh man, we in 12 months they paid me about $750,000 in fees, but we cut their losses from 1 million a month to being the most profitable division they had. So it
Mm.
was worth 25 million dollars a year for my $750,000. It was a steal.
There you go. Exactly. That's as it turns around. Now you mentioned VCs, and then you said down in that progression, you got into private equity. Was that selling parts of
Yep.
companies, or how did you do things with that?
So we had an internet company. We were doing pay per performance lead gen, digital marketing, and it's a funny story too. This is 1995, 96, and we show up and there's two guys standing on our front door waiting for us with a cups of coffee. Right. This is how anxious these guys are to
Yes,
invest
they need to
sometimes.
move money. They need to place money. That's the one thing people don't understand, right? They've got jobs to do as well.
And we're like, hello, and they're like, yeah, we want to talk to you about buying your company. And we were like, oh my gosh, okay. So to shorten this story, they ended up offering us 50 million. We flew up to Boston and we got there and they tried to lower the valuation at the last minute to
Mhm.
40. And it was just me and my other senior partner. And I'm the talker, so I'm talking and he's just sitting there staring. And they were like, well, we're going to lower the valuation to 40 million, but we're ready to go. And I looked at them and I said, well, we're not interested in 40 million. And you got these guys in this private equity group. They're looking at two hicks, from Alpharetta, Georgia. I used to mow grass and I'm telling them, no, I'm not interested in your 40 million. And they were like, what do you mean you're not interested? I'm like, well, you've already had Price Waterhouse in here. They've already done the due diligence. I got all the documents. I'm not taking 10 million less. I might as well take all your stuff and shop it to the market. And they were like, well, that's the best we can do. I said, all right, well, we're not interested. And I remember my partner you can't see my eyes on camera. His eyes were like as big as saucers. Like I'm turning down 40 million. And we leave. He didn't say a word to me until we got in the cab. And he looks at me. He goes, are you sure? And I said, I'm sure. 6 weeks later, another VC came in out of Chicago, said, you guys want to sell? We said, yeah, but we already turned down 50. And they were like, well, tell you what, we'll make it 80. And we said, yeah. And we sold the company for 80 like 6 weeks later. So turning down 40 million was the best thing we could have done at the time.
Yeah, and it's so once you have that confidence, I think even going back to what we said before, right? Going into the room and knowing, uh, because they're there for they're not wasting their time. They want to speak to somebody. They want to do a deal as well. What are some of the tips you'd have to people that might be negotiating? I mean, negotiation in anything, but specific with respect to a business transaction.
It's tough because the clinical answer is understand your value and be willing to walk away. But that's extremely hard to do when somebody's standing there with a gigantic amount of cash, right?
Yeah.
So I think my answer is bring somebody else in who's unemotionally involved in this transaction and allow them to work with you because they aren't going to make the emotional decision that you might make, much like we could have done and turned away 10 million and lost 40. So, clinical answers are different than when you're in the moment. So you just got to be real, real careful. And my advice is bring somebody in unemotional.
Is that in the form of a professional advisor, or as you say, someone unemotional? Who is that person? Who qualifies for that?
That's tough. That's a tough answer, right? I always say this is one of the things I talk about in coaching and consulting, which is what I do. Everybody says they're a professional. Most of them are not. Everybody says that they're a coach or a trainer. Most of them don't have the experience. So whoever you're going to bring in, whoever you're going to listen to, you need to vet the hell out of that person. Make sure they've been there and done that, and then they can give you real advice and not theoretical advice. So you got to vet them. That's the answer to the question, and vet them hard.
And what are the best ways of vetting someone? Like getting right down to it, right? Like the brass tacks of it. If you're assessing a situation or a deal, what are some of the things that you do?
Look up their background, look them up on LinkedIn, talk to other people in the industry, talk to people that aren't, doing what you're doing, but find somebody else they've worked with, get reference. You got to ask questions. You got to look around and find out who this person is and find out if they're legit. I know people who claim to be legit who aren't, and people get sucked into that stuff all the time, and it doesn't do them any good.
It's a shame, right?
So,
I mean, the famous, dogs on the internet, right? On the internet, anybody can be a dog. It's the same thing. You've got a coach for everything these days.
yep.
As you say, it makes a lot of sense to check to see, are they just talking the talk, or are they actually done it? Have they been in the trenches the way we talked? Have they seen a deal come together? Have they shopped a company? Have they worked with VCs? Have they done private equity? All of these things, right? So that that they actually know what they're talking about when you actually seek their counsel.
Yep, you got to vet them and vet them hard. And then, JP, take their advice.
Listen to the advice, as hard as it may be,
Listen
right?
to the advice.
I don't know how many times I've sat with somebody and gone through saying, listen, this is what the deal looks like, or this is what's going to occur. It's an example, so typical. And it's interesting, as you mentioned, walking out of that $40 million deal. I say frequently to clients, like, the deal's not done till it's signed and the paperwork has been exchanged. So this can walk. We just said we're working on a deal this week, and it's pens down, right? And we'll maybe get back to it next year. So many times I'm working with a business owner and cautioning them, don't cash your checks yet, because you don't know this deal is done until it's done. And they don't realize that, right? Or I guess they're overly optimistic. And it's important to make sure you don't want to throw cold water on it, but making sure that they're soberly aware of what it takes to actually get across the finish line.
And the bigger challenge from your perspective, and even mine, and really anybody who's a good consultant or coach out there, is people take half the advice and then the shit doesn't work, and they come back and go, well, I listened to you. And you're like, no, you didn't. You did half of what I said, and half isn't going to work. It's like halfway filling your car up with gas. It's not going to go the same distance. It just isn't going to work. You got to do it all, right? And I tell people, look, what I tell you isn't the only way to do something, but it's one way to do it, and I know it works. So either take my advice or don't. But if you do half, I'm afraid I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, we're not going to get there. We're not going to get there as it is, right? So yeah, very important to obviously take advice. I'm always encouraging people to make sure that they are relying upon good counsel. And I'm glad you said just the same thing. What kind of future business trends are you seeing? We have a lot of people on, and it'd be interesting to hear if you've done anything in the AI space, or you're seeing any of these things come across, or you're working with anybody that's doing AI right now. Are you seeing much of that?
AI is going to change the world, in my opinion. I think, at least from my perspective, the only thing I use it for in my businesses is what we consider idea generation. It's amazing what you can type into a chat GBT and what it will spit back out, and what it can do from a free flow of thoughts and ideas that you can take and utilize. I know so many people that are really digging into that and using it into their business that I haven't done yet. So I am nowhere near an expert in AI. I just know that it's going to be freaking amazing when it really gets rolling.
Yeah, I mean,
and maybe scary.
It's orders of magnitude the way it's going to change things. It's going back to it's even bigger than the internet, right? What we're seeing from AI, the power that it has, because of the sheer productivity that can result from it, right? You say even from a thought generation or idea generation, all the way through to automating a lot of the tasks that we do.
I saw this yesterday. AI can read an entire book in 5 seconds and remember every single word for word. You can't do that. That's amazing. And then it can spit out a report on it, by the way. It's just amazing what
it can rewrite it in another language. There's so many different things that it can do. So yeah, absolutely. We're going to be seeing much opportunity in the area, but people need to be aware of how fundamentally it's going to change everything. It's part of the counsel that they receive, right? And so to be aware and make sure that they are, if they're in an industry that's going to be impacted by it, to be aware of that as well. What kind of things do you, when you're working with somebody, what kind of things do you encourage them to think of? What kind of things to keep their eyes on the horizon, if you will?
Yeah, most of my consulting is based around what we call two tracks. There's a financial track and a sales track. And from a financial perspective, I focus on what we call historical P&L analysis using pattern recognition to figure out where you were and where you are and how you got here, which will also give me the trend line on where you're going. And then the second track is what we call reverse engineering. So what is the goal? When is the goal want to be achieved? And then based on where you were and where you are, and based on those trends, we can predict exactly what you need to do to get there, right? I mean, exactly. So you build what we call a target pro forma in the future based on the goal. We back all the way down to where we are. We match that against the historicals, and I can build you and pretty much, I call it time travel. I can time travel into your business and tell you what's going to happen. So I focus a lot on the financials. And then on the sales side, sales management, sales tracking, individual representative and salesperson tracking, overall company management tracking. Most of what I do is in the finance and sales
So it's
arena.
a lot of data, right? You're working from data,
It's all data.
obviously.
So
Yeah.
here's the example. I was at a company, they're a $28 million company out in Seattle. I'm going back out there next week. I did an offsite presentation for them and I said, look, you guys need to forget the fact that the name of your company is XYZ. You are no longer XYZ. You are a data company. You have reached a point where you have enough data that data is going to drive your success, failure, your scale, or inability to scale in the future. The data is here. And I did some analysis and I said, oh my God, you have millions of dollars laying on the floor and you just can't see it. And the data there can prove it. All you got to do is figure out how to get the data and then analyze, manage, and look at the data, and it'll make all the difference in the world to your business.
It's such good advice, and people are they're not aware of the assets, some of the assets they have available to them. And going back to the way we just discussed AI, the way the assets can be deployed given the new technologies that are arriving, right? Data is going to be king. Content has been king for the last 30, 40 years, but data is going to be king in the go forward. And as
A lot of
people
these
start to
companies
realize
have
that,
the data. They have the data, JP. They just don't know how to put it together and use it. When I put the data together, in every company I've gone in, even on a sales training basis, we'll go in and pull the data on their entire sales force and say that the bottom 10% of your sales force is losing you money. You think they're generating gross revenue? They're actually costing you money. And if we fire them, your sales will go up, your overhead costs will go down, your company will do better. And people are like, oh my God, I can't believe that. I'm like, that's because you're not looking at the data. Data is data and numbers never lie.
yes, and there you go. Addition by subtraction, right? That's always very, very common and important to look at. Hidden talents. You mentioned that from before. Everybody's got them. What are some of your hidden
Mhm.
talents?
Well, I told you my first one was I could sell. That was something I didn't know. And the second thing I didn't know, remember, I'm a kid who failed out of high school, right? I graduated, I got back in with a 1.2 GPA, didn't go to college, failed algebra. For whatever reason, JP, if you give me a 50-page Excel spreadsheet, to me, in my head, it looks like a puzzle. And I can find the pieces that don't fit. I can find formulas just like that that aren't matching and adding up. I can find problems with it, and then I can put it all back together, and I have no idea why I can do that. I, maybe I'm autistic. I haven't figured it out yet. But analyzing data and then sales are two of the things that I would have never known I could do had I not progressed in business the way I did and had the opportunities to do those things. But now I'm as good or better than anybody at doing that kind of stuff.
And it's so interesting, right? I mean, you make in jest you say autistic, but there are certain things that are innate, right? And I've always found that there are things that are innate to each individual, right? And when you can discover or be aware of what you're innately good at and exploit it, it's often very powerful, isn't it?
It's unbelievable because you have ability to bring a talent to a situation or a business or something that other people can't do, can't see, don't even know it's available, right? It's just so weird. I remember walking into a company and they were saying, well, here's our new product brochure. And I flipped through 3 pages and I said, you misspelled a word right here. And they were like, how did you see that? I'm like, I have no idea. Just stuck out like a sore thumb to me. And I don't know why, but I can do the same thing with numbers.
It's so interesting that does, I say, the things that jump out. What motivates you?
Well, today, for the first 40 years of my life, the only thing that motivated me was money and success. And that was a product of my background. Um, my cautionary tale there is don't be so busy trying to win the world that you lose everything that is important in the process. And that's a big one because I ended up divorced. Um, I won the world financially, but ended up divorced and didn't get to, see my son go through high school because he was with his mom, blah, 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 blah. What motivates me today is I've had two mentors give me essentially the same speech. And it's, once you've achieved the financial success that you've got, there are two things you're going to have to do in life to be happy. And if you don't do these two things, you're always going to be chasing money. One of them is you need to find something you're passionate about, irrelevant whether it's money or not, and chase it. And number two, you need to find a way to give back. And if you can find a way to give back to the world something that part of what the world gave you, those two things, chasing a passion that's not involved in money and finding a way to give back, will truly make you happy in life. And so those are the two things that I'm trying to accomplish in my back half.
That's great. That's such sage advice. You hear, I mean, so many experts speak to happiness. And I know it firsthand, right? The Millionaire's Lawyer, I've worked with a lot of people who've made a lot of money. That does not, the way you just described, necessarily translate into happiness, right? But those that do study happiness, a lot of them turn to what you just described, right? Is having a purpose, right? And then doing good for others, right? Or serving others. Very, very key things. So it's unfortunate. It usually takes us a little bit longer to realize those things, but it's great advice. And obviously your mentors having said that to you is something that they learn themselves. What has your mentor relationship been like? It's interesting you can speak to two mentors. For many people speak of how important it is to have a good mentor, and it sounds like been fortunate to have two of them.
I've had several actually. My first one was one of my first senior business partner, the guy I told you that was with me in those meetings. I'll tell you that in business, I know there are a lot of people who don't like partnerships. I will tell you, I've never made as much money as an individual business owner as I have in a partnership. And part of that gets back to what I write about in one of my books is the different personalities within the business, and you can't be all of them. And you have to have people fill in where you're weak. And today I understand my weaknesses. So I bring people into my businesses that can backfill the things I can't do. My first partner was Steve, and just the way he operated and he dealt with people was amazing to me. Taught me how to be a better business person and, quite frankly, a better man. One of my other business mentors, a guy named Paul Pilzer, he's out in Park City, very successful guy. He was the first person that told me what I just told you about, you have to find a passion and you have to find something to give back. And then very recently, I'll tell you an interesting story. I was over on Necker Island. You know who Richard Branson is.
Of course, yeah.
I was over on Necker Island for 5 days. We got to spend a lot of time with Richard. And I asked Richard one night, I said, it was his 73rd birthday that night. I said, Richard, it's your birthday. What in the world still drives you? You have like 100 companies, all these virgin brands, and you're working with entrepreneurs all over the world, and you're trying to solve world hunger. And he told the most amazing stories you've ever heard in your life. And I can't get into them, but oh my God, the stuff this man's done. I said, what drives you to still go on at your age? Like you live in an island where you have 20 people that you walk in a room and they hand you a drink and you want to play tennis and there's a pro. And he said, Brian, here's the deal. I'm going to paraphrase for Richard. He said, if you have a talent or an ability, and that ability can be running a business and making money. If you have a talent and ability, and you can use that talent or ability to make the world a better place, then you have an obligation as a human being to do that. And that's why I still do it. That's like a mic drop moment. I was like, holy crap. I mean, unbelievable. So try to be more like Richard.
Try to be more like Richard. That is a mic drop moment. And you're right. It's the type of thing that we hear, and it's important for it to be said so that perhaps it resonates, right? For those people that only take half the advice, right? Or only hear half the message. So hopefully they're hearing it here today. If anyone's been listening and is interested in learning more, what's the best way to reach you?
BrianWillMedia.com. BrianWillMedia.com. My books, my podcasts, my shows, my coach, everything about me is on BrianWillMedia.com.
Yes.
See anything you like, drop me a message.
Yes, please have a look at that as well, because I mean, you've got a wealth of information there as well, your books and all the things that you've done. Brian, thank you for joining us here today. Really do appreciate it. We'll have all those links in the show notes as well for those that are interested in learning more or perhaps connecting with Brian. And Brian, I'd like to end these shows with we've had a lot of advice here, but if we could distill it into one or two things that have worked for you, right? We've talked about as you've sort of progressed through the evolution of your business career and life, right? As you've found things, and then even relating back to some of the things that Richard Branson mentions as well too. If you were had an opportunity to turn around and give that advice to an 18-year-old Brian, what would you be saying to him and hoping that he listens to more than half then.
If I had an opportunity to tell 18-year-old Brian something, I would tell him to relax and not be so ridiculously obsessed with money, because that's not what life is all about. If I had the opportunity to talk to any young or intermediate entrepreneur, I always like to tell them this. You know who Tim Cook is,
Yes.
JP?
Yes.
He runs Apple, right? Guy's clearly a friggin' genius. You can't not be a genius and not run one of the largest companies in the world. He has a board of directors that come in and sit with him like once a quarter, and they're like, hey, Tim, what's going on in Apple? And he goes, they're getting their Jimmy John subs and they're chowing down at the corporate. And he's like, well, this is all my problems. And they say, based on our collective experience, we think you should do this. And these are the decisions you ought to make. And so he takes their decisions and he goes off and he helps run Apple. They also pay for a corporate coach for him. I met a guy named Dave Meltzer, who's a coach to 3 of the top 50 CEOs. He has a corporate coach that comes in. He's like, all right, Tim, what's going on? How you feeling? Tell me about blah, blah, blah. If this guy who's so freaking smart needs a board of directors and a personal coach to help him do what he does, what in the world makes you as an entrepreneur think you can do it all by yourself? And that's my advice.
There you go. That's great stuff. Brian, thanks so much for joining us here today. Look forward to the next time on The Millionaire's Lawyer.
JP, thanks for having me. This was fun.